There you go. Hi, everyone. Really happy to invite Heidi back to our author chats. You've been on with us before, haven't you? Do you want to start us off with an intro to you and your books?
Yes, I hope you can all hear me. Hi, everyone. I am Heidi Amsinck, and I am I am Danish. I was born in Denmark. I emigrated to the UK age 24, and these days I choose to write in English. I had a long career as a journalist. So if you want to know where I got the idea for my main character, it's from my own career. So there are basically two things that I'm passionate about. I write about Copenhagen, which is where I was born, and a city I love. And I think it's a perfect city for setting a crime novel. And I've always written about Copenhagen, all my stories previously, before the Jensen books were set there. And I also write about what it's like to investigate as a reporter, as opposed to what it's like to investigate as a police officer, and the differences between the two. My series features a reporter who returns to Copenhagen after many years away, and I kind of created that character in order to be able to tell people a little bit about my city, and still be able to get away with pointing things out that were a bit different to what readers in the UK would know. So Jensen, my reporter who returns home, she notices lots of things that makes her very observant, and that means that she is able to gain another perspective on the investigations. There's another main character, her previous sort of lover. She had an affair with him. He forgot to tell her that he was married, and they've had this kind of push-pull relationship for many years, and suddenly she's coming home to his city. And really, I think each of the three books are based around an investigation where the two almost race each other before they kind of get to the conclusion that they have to work together in order to solve the crimes. And usually there's kind of two storylines that are woven together and then come together. And I guess the point I'm making again and again is that is kind of just the way that two very different people, very diverse people, bring something to an investigation. And then for a bit of light relief, I created a third character who's called Gustav, who's a teenage boy who's also a little bit on the periphery. He's not getting on very well at school. He's been expelled. Towards the end of this book, he's sort of looking at maybe returning to school, but he brings another perspective because he's completely anarchic. He doesn't observe any rules. He's never heard of press ethics. He does what he wants, and he's able to sort of go places where neither Jensen nor DI Henrik Jungersen can go. And so it's the three of them against the world, with time to solve a mystery. So I've written 3 books so far, and the latest one is called Back from the Dead. And yeah, that's me, basically.
The comments are not pulling through onto here, but Laura Hamilton has said that she loved the first 2 books and is really looking forward to this one.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to hear.
Much like me, when your publishers got in contact and were like, we sent you a book, would you like to book Heidi? And I was like, yes.
Great.
Because I was really excited that there was another one coming out. They're so good.
I'm glad to hear that, especially as I write number 4. So maybe somebody will also be looking forward to that. That's a story for next year.
Do you have, because I feel like there's a whole story arc going with the main character and even some of the periphery characters, which we'll get onto in a bit. But I feel like there's like a story arc going with them. Do you think it'll stop the series? Will you get to an end with those characters and finish, or?
Not for a long while yet. I've hinted at various stories that we need to explore. So Jensen in the first book, she has a friend. Everyone she knows or forms a relationship with is also living on the periphery of Danish society, and she has a friend who is an Israeli coffee seller, and his superpower is to guess the coffee that she wants. So he sees her approach and he immediately starts making coffee, and he basically moved to Denmark to teach the Danish people about drinking proper coffee. But in this book, we're starting to sort of think maybe that isn't the whole story about this guy. So his story will eventually be told, and there are a lot of sort of dead ends, and one book isn't enough to kind of tell those stories. So there's a lot more to come. I'm kind of planning number 5 as I write number 4. So I really enjoy kind of finding out about all these different characters, and if I find a character I really like, I'll kind of go back to them and tell their story. So in the first book, we meet a Syrian refugee who was a driver for a politician, and I really liked him as a character. He sort of just turned up, and I thought be interesting to explore his story a little bit more. So he comes to the fore a little bit more in book 3.
He does, but he kind of features in all of the books, doesn't he?
Yeah.
They were 2 people I was going to ask you about, because the Israeli coffee seller is like my favorite character in the book. I'm not going to lie. I think he's brilliant. And yeah, you kind of like, you're reading, and it was good to get more of their story in this one, but you do feel like there's still more to find out about both of them.
Yeah, definitely. I've left a few kind of things hanging. So in this book, Leon, I can't sort of Leon is the name of the Israeli, and I can't sort of give away what happens in the book, but let's just say he plays a surprising kind of role, and it kind of leads you to think, I wonder what's up with him. And you've got the other characters, the politician who is close to the prime minister, but he's sort of been given the cold shoulder because he's basically argued against the Danish policy of sending Syrians back to Syria to sort of expatriate them, and he's spoken against it because in 2015, when you might remember the TV images of Syrian refugees walking up through Europe, and he intercepted some Syrian refugees walking along the Danish motorway, and a man and his wife, and gave them a home, gave the man a job, sort of helped the family establish themselves. And he won't talk about this, but this is something he did. And Assis feels quite grateful to him for this. So yeah, I quite like these sort of characters that you see and you think, oh, this is Syrian refugee, but actually there's a lot to Assis's story. So yeah, those are the storylines kind of running in the background, and then you have a more conventional kind of crime plot sitting at the front of each book.
And it's interesting to see like other people's responses to their positions in society as well, isn't it? Because like you say, they're on the periphery and they're not kind of citizens of Denmark, but they're still.
Yeah, they are. Their stories are incredibly important and are kind of central. And I think I started a bit of a theme, with the first book where Jensen stumbles across a body in the snow, and it's assumed it's a sort of Eastern European beggar who's sitting in the street, and it's as if that's not as serious as if it was someone else. And I think that's outrageous, and I like playing around with people's easy assumptions about what's happened, and there's a completely different story behind it in the first book. So people's first conclusions aren't necessarily right. I like playing with people's sort of preconceived ideas about who people are, and it's the same with Gustav. I think I say somewhere in the first book that teenage boys are, they're either kind of ignored, or people are a little bit sort of frightened of them, but actually that they're not really listened to. And Gustav is actually a really nice lad. He may be a little bit unconventional, and he doesn't really listen, but he's somebody who really gives you hope for the future of society. He's 17 and very gobby, but actually his heart's in the right place.
And in this book, he's kind of helpful to the paper as well, isn't he? Because they're kind of facing problems in the paper and need to move, I don't know, a bit more into the modern world with like digital things and stuff. And he's out like filming stuff on his phone and producing content and being
Yeah.
like quite
And he's
novel.
persuading Jensen to kind of go on X, as it is now, and creating videos, but they get into trouble with the union representative because, of course, he's a young lad. He hasn't been to journalism school. He doesn't know anything, but it turns out he's actually got a real talent for it. And of course, Jensen's own story is that she left school and joined the local newspaper. She isn't. She's an uneducated hack, as somebody calls her at one point, but she's sort of forged her own path, and therefore she has a lot of affinity with Gustav and kind of takes him under her wing. I also like Gustav because he gives me a reason to talk a little bit about this dying profession. Being a newspaper journalist, there's not many investigative reporters left on any newspaper in the world, simply because they're kind of going down the pan. So I quite like the idea of Jensen operating in this sort of dying environment and telling a young person about it.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask is the paper that Jensen and work for, is that a real paper?
It's I think, like a lot of things in fiction, it's a sort of mashup of various influences. The location is the location of one of Denmark's oldest newspapers, more left-leaning. It's, there's no secret, it occupies exactly the same place. It's called Politiken. This newspaper is called Dagbladet, which just means the daily. So I've borrowed the building, but the interior and some of the staff members are actually from my own newspaper, which is 500 yards down the road in Copenhagen, where I kind of trained, and the newspaper building has changed a lot since, but I'm kind of incorporating that interior. But it's basically just it's not the biggest newspaper, and therefore it's kind of suffering, and it hasn't really come into the digital age. And at the beginning of this book, the newspaper has been it's been bought by a Swedish venture capital fund that's trying to kind of change it into this sort of digital news operation. They've gone through round and round and round of sacking. There's almost nobody left to write the newspaper. And that is a theme that kind of continues. But somehow, even in this difficult scenario and environment, Jensen manages to still create stories, and she gets on kind of national TV for the stories that she creates. But the world around her is crumbling.
Yeah, and her role is changing in the paper, isn't it? Because there are people leaving.
Yeah.
So she's not got quite the same freedom as she sort of first had with it.
No, in the beginning, she really struggled to find her feet until her editor, who's quite a formidable woman, and we've had some amazing female newspaper editors in Denmark, and she may or may not be based on one or two of them. And her editor kind of says, come on, you're the best I've got, pull yourself together. And in the end, she's actually made chief crime reporter, which helps me because it gives her an excuse to call the police and look at press releases from the police and investigate and do all the things that crime reporters do, going to the courts, listening in on cases and so on.
So Donna and Sam said hi as well, and Laura says Gustav is her favourite character.
Oh, thank you very much. He's actually also secretly mine. Although I quite like. I know people don't warm to Henrik, who's the detective inspector, but I quite like him because he's his life's in a sort of terrible mess, and he's probably you know, he loves working probably because it means he doesn't have to confront things in his private life. But I actually, you know, he will come good in this series. I quite like him. He's a totally imperfect, sort of unreconstructed man, and he knows it as well. He's aware of it. He sort of can't help himself, and I quite like that.
There is a really, I don't like, there's some really funny moments with him in this book. I warm to him a lot more.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good.
There's like a whole bit where he doesn't want to go on like holiday, does he? Because he doesn't like to fly, and then he has to drive, and he just doesn't want to go, and he's like, "Oh, this case has come up, and I can't go."
Yes, and his wife says, "Not again. You are not serious." You know. Yeah, he hates flying, and that means driving from Copenhagen down through Europe to Italy, and that means him and his wife will argue, and yeah, he just can't stand it. He can't stand any kind of divergence from his routine, basically, this man. But it is because he, you know, at one point, I think he says he says, you know, that he thinks, I don't really want to spend time with my own family. This is seriously, you know, this is bad. I'm in a bad situation. Yeah, he gets himself into impossible situations. He also has, there's some criminals in here. There's a particular incident that gives him a lot of cause to kind of, you know, laugh at the stupidity of criminals, which I also quite enjoyed. And that episode, I noticed somebody wrote, the book came out in Denmark a couple of months ago, and people said, "Oh, you know, that episode is really far-fetched. It involves a finger and a shotgun, I can say, but it is actually a real story." So I spend a lot of time with police officers to sort of, you know, do my research, and I really like that part of what I do in writing. And sometimes I sneak a real story in there, and they're usually, there's, you know, kind of life is stranger than fiction.
I
Um,
believe it was a real story.
oh, good, good, yeah,
You spend time with like Danish police officers because the
yeah.
procedures are going to be very. I don't know how they're going to be very different, but they're going to be different, aren't they?
Yeah, they are different. They're similar in some ways. I think the hierarchy is very much similar in the way they're kind of organized. But one difference, for instance, is that Danish police officers carry guns, and in the UK, it's something that special armed officers do. But you know, a kind of normal police officer would not wear a gun. So when I go and meet the team I speak to a lot in Denmark, they all sit with, you know, with their guns in their holsters in their belt. They just walk around with them. But a little known fact is that, you know, hardly any Danish police officer will ever fire their weapon. They go through an entire career. They spend time on the shooting range to learn how to use the weapon and to keep up the ability to do it. But it's very, very rare that a police officer fires his weapon. And I can reveal that happens to Henrik in the first episode. And it's something that then triggers a lot of debriefings and so on afterwards. But that would be the same in the UK. I also talk a lot to police officers here in the UK, and there are some really universal parts of, you know, being a police officer. I visited the office in Denmark, and in the corner there's a kind of fold up bed which says a lot about, you know, how they work. Sometimes they sleep in the office, and Henrik also does that at one point.
But sometimes you wonder if Henrik does that because he doesn't want to go home more than.
Yeah, that might be part of it. Yeah, and he uses work as an excuse to not confront, you know, difficult things in his life, which is probably quite common, I suspect, and it goes far beyond policing. But to kind of seek the solace that comes from that kind of steady plodding of police work, which is very different to being a journalist, where, you know, Henrik is totally bound by process, by rules, regulations. There are fewer rules for journalists. Of course, there are rules, but she's able to kind of go places that he can't go without, you know, kind of doing a formal investigation and so on. And I quite like that difference between the two of them.
Yeah, they're a really good kind of. Don't want to say a double act because I feel like you need Gusto in there as well. I feel like they're
Yeah,
a triple act.
yeah. Yeah, I think they're not really a double act either, because very often they they work against each other. She uses him, she uses his guilty conscience to get information, and he withholds things from her, because he's afraid of what she might do with the information. And yet they end up being a de facto double act. They don't always want to, but they kind of get dragged into that, kicking and screaming. Um,
That's
yeah.
great. There's some like interesting, not new always. There are some new characters, aren't there, in this one? But there are like it's quite a rich businessman that comes in at one point. Who's
Yeah.
quite an interesting character.
Yeah, so I really like, and that's influences are everywhere, but I've always really 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 loved Sherlock Holmes. I love the kind of good brother bad brother kind of scenario, and I quite like the kind of good versus evil kind of original kind of undercurrent that's always there. And of course in the first book, you've got sort of, I call him Deep Throat. He's basically he's a solicitor who's kind of everywhere. He knows everybody, but he's got a very discreet personality. Nobody knows about him, and he turns out to be related to someone who is his opposite in every way. And I quite like that. And he might, I can't say what happens in this book, but we may hear more about that relationship between the two of them. So that there's this character who's called Deep Throat at one point says, you know, they're standing on the square in front of the Queen's castle, now the King's castle in Denmark, and they stand outside, and he says to Jensen, "This is a tiny kingdom, and I'll do anything to defend it." Basically, he sees himself, this character who's sort of a mover and shaker in the background. He sees himself as a defender of Denmark, and a free Denmark, Denmark free from crime. And there's this other character who's very much sees things differently. I quite like that.
And we've got Jensen sort of having a relationship in this one as well, haven't we? That's quite sort of a change from the first two books, where she's just like a lone wolf, and then
so she's basically, she's got this ongoing on-off love affair with a guy who's married, so their relationship it can't go anywhere. He's not leaving his wife, yet he's got this, he thinks that he's entitled to have some sort of hold over her. He doesn't like her seeing other men, which is of course completely unacceptable, totally unacceptable, particularly because of the way he is. So she tries to sort of free herself from him, and he kind of pulls her back. And in this book, she makes a really determined effort to build a life with another guy, and of course he doesn't like that, but that's just tough. She's going to do it, and she won't listen to him when he starts telling her about the new guy she's found, because she suspects that he's basically he doesn't want her to be happy with anyone else. He doesn't want her. She can't be happy with someone else. That's a familiar story. So they've got this sort of hold, but she's trying to break free. She's trying to kind of put her relationship with Henrik behind her, move on.
do we think? I mean, she also gets injured a lot in the books, doesn't she? She's had a really rough go of it in these books.
Yes, she. I don't like books where, because there's obviously a male character who's a policeman and has a gun, and there's this female character whom we're told she's kind of very small. She looks like a girl. She's kind of running around Copenhagen, and I didn't want her to constantly I didn't want her to be saved by Henrik. I want her to actively, she's not a passive sort of woman kind of, getting into trouble and then having to be saved. She is taking things into her own hands. So she doesn't, like Henrik would wait for backup. He would wait for a partner to go in with him. She just goes right in. If she suspects something's wrong, she'll go right in. Which is a really nice trait that she has. She doesn't have the filter. She doesn't stop and say, am I going to be unsafe here? And Gustav doesn't do that at all. He won't. He'll just barge right in, basically, if he wants to do something.
We've got a hello from Leslie as well.
Hello.
Are you tempted to take them outside of Denmark at all?
Yeah, so I am, but it would only be here. It would only be to London. So Jensen lived, so all the years she was away from Denmark, she basically lived here. And I thought it could be really fun if at some point there was, a leg of a story that took place over here in the UK, because she's very familiar with the UK, and as I say, was a reporter here, so she has many sources. She's got a lot of people connections, and I know that eventually that there will probably be something, and she might also work with the UK police. I think this is a beauty. She travels. Maybe the rest of them not so much, but she can travel.
So you said that a lot of the sort of characters in the newspaper and things are set on like people that you've known when you were working at it. How much of you is in the people who work for the newspaper?
Probably not very much. I don't think there's very much of me actually in Jensen. I think she's far braver than I am, far more kind of tenacious. I do think that a lot of the people who are in the book are sort of, people from my career. I was in a sort of also in the dying days, but when I worked as a newspaper journalist in Copenhagen, I worked with a lot of really, really fun characters, people who'd been around for years, people who didn't take any shit from anybody. And I really, really enjoyed that environment, and I secretly wish I could go back in time, just to have just one day on the newspaper the way it used to be, when there were still sub-editors and there were still photographers and so on. It was an incredibly fun environment, because you had all these very, very irreverent people who basically wouldn't listen to anybody and just did what they wanted and kind of wrote what they wanted. And I think that environment was incredibly fun to kind of grow up in. I put a character in the books who's an old editor who came back to the newspaper to write obituaries, and there was indeed such a character on my newspaper when I worked there. But he's the ghost of newspapers past. That's his role in the books. So he's there to kind of remind us of what things used to be. And he sits in his office and smokes cigars and listens to jazz, and he cuts articles out of all the Danish newspapers every day, and he marks them in pen and he puts them away in a filing cabinet, which of course there's absolutely no need to do that anymore because it's all digital, but he insists on doing it. And his archive and his big brain, Jensen basically uses to kind of forge ahead in her cases. But he's very old, he's not doing very well, he smokes too much, so he lives a very precarious existence.
But he is also a great character.
Yeah, he's fun because he sees right through Jensen. He obviously quite likes her, but he also he walks around the newspaper office and takes coffee cups from everyone and finishes and drinks the cold coffee. But he knows everybody, and as I say, he can see through Jensen. So when she's trying to get away with an incomplete answer, or she's not using her brain, she's not working on the story the way he thinks she should be, he'll tell her. And he's probably the only one who can really do that, along with her editor, who's Margrethe, who's as I say, modeled on these very powerful women in the Danish media.
There's yeah, I mean, I think you've got quite a few interesting characters in the paper. I mean, you just with him, is because there's so many real kind of amazing characters in your books. Are you ever tempted to sort of do some short stories where those characters can come to the fore,
Oh
maybe
yeah.
voice in like a I don't know, like a collection of short stories where you get a bit about each of those kind of people.
Yeah, or some sort of, some sort of spin-off, I think could be interesting. A sort of, more in the kind of spy thriller vein. I think there's some characters who invite to that. I've just written a sort of 5 episode radio serial in the book at bedtime slot about Jensen. Um, uh, that's going to run on Radio 4 in hopefully in June. So it's not been produced yet, but I've basically written it, and it's not taking out some of the characters, basically exactly the same characters, but it's a kind of paranormal investigation. I am a huge fan of a podcast series called Uncanny. I don't know if anybody knows this, but if you haven't heard it, and I love this program. So it basically it'll take a paranormal event, or like a poltergeist or something, and it'll have a person who is willing to believe, suspending disbelief, and it'll have another person who will sort of say, well, there's an actual explanation for this. And I've always loved playing around with that. Just I like playing around with, do you believe in the paranormal or don't you? And and so this series is about a kind of poltergeist investigation. So that's taking the series in a slightly different direction, because I don't think I might I might investigate in that vein later on, but it's quite a different genre. It's a little bit different, but it's still a crime investigation, but it just has this supernatural element.
See, I love crime investigations with a bit of a supernatural element.
Oh, do you? Oh, good.
Yeah, that's my kind of book written all over
Okay.
it.
Oh, that's good. That's nice to think, because there's a lot of, I mean, what got me writing, I wrote many short stories before I started writing novels, and they were all kind of the spooky, is it real kind of vein, all the stories. And I love that. And there are so many evocative kind of spooky places in Copenhagen that I just love. It's a very old city. It's a medieval city. So its core, it's got some really interesting buildings with very deep basements, because what was street level is now, first floor. So you've got some really interesting things to play with there. The history, lots of wood paneled old rooms. There's even a castle in the middle of Copenhagen, called Rosenborg Castle, and it's a fairy tale. It looks like a sort of Disney castle, and it's surrounded by a park, and it's right in the center of town. That's a great location for something to happen, something spooky. So I love all that. I can just, if you haven't heard Uncanny, there's 3 series and a number of specials, and it's just brilliant. I think it started with the Battersea Poltergeist. I don't know if you remember, there was a podcast series about that. And then it developed into this series where they have guests on to sort of talk about their experiences. There are some things there that you think that there can't be a natural explanation for this. This is truly freaky, and it's just so well produced.
I'm reading the comments that are coming up. So Donna said she would totally read you doing a uncanny thing as well.
Oh, good.
Saying she's gonna have to keep an eye out for the radio things because she loves a nod to the spooky, and enjoyed the Battersea Poltergeist.
Oh,
And
good.
You've sold Donna on a trip to Copenhagen as well.
Oh, good, good. I did think actually of producing something like a Jensen, little Jensen tour of Copenhagen, because we've been to a lot of different locations now, and I know them really well. And I did think of kind of, because I think I should be on commission from the Danish Tourist Board, really. I hope I'm sending a few people over, because it's such a lovely little kind of gem of a city. It's just so tiny, 1.2 million people, and can walk from one end to the other. Lots of water. It's very beautiful. The weather changes Copenhagen from 1 minute to the next. Yeah, so it's a really, it's a great stage, just like I love, I adore the crime fiction of Ian Rankin in Edinburgh, and I love, I don't know if people know Louise Welsh, who writes books set in Glasgow. She's written a series called, the first book was called The Cutting Room, and then there was another book called The Second Cut. If you haven't read her, just check her out. Check out her descriptions of Glasgow, and it's like, oh, she just brings that place to life. She's just written put out a new novel called To the Dogs, I think it's called. She is something else. And I love that. I love writers who are really sort of, can bring their cities to life. I love Donna Leon's Venice. There are times I think of those books so much. Do you remember, I don't know if anybody's read Donna Leon, but just the meals that the detective cooks with his wife. He's got a rather lovely, normal family life. And, he'll come home and they'll have a glass of this wine and they'll have it with a little bit of this cheese. And you just think, I've got to go to Venice immediately. And I love that about it. And they're pretty good investigations as well.
You should totally. Donna says if you get your Jensen's Guide to Copenhagen done for next year, she'll test it out for you.
Brilliant. Love it.
I think you should, because I think a lot of people love it. I think it's nice to travel and learn about places through books.
Mm.
So, there's lots of books I love for that,
yeah,
for that reason. There's a great series set in Georgia.
Yeah. Okay. What's that called?
Oh, what does it start with? I can't remember. It's Alistair Liddell. But his books are great because he lived in Georgia, so he really knows it. And you're reading the book, and it really genuinely feels
like you're there.
And I think it's lovely when you go places. So I've been to Copenhagen, but if I went back, I would want to go and look at the places that were in the book. So I knew it from reading it.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? I'd feel like I'd know it more now from reading your descriptions. So if I went back, I'd be like, oh, well, this is, I'd want to go and find the places.
Yeah, and I do, I like that idea of a crime series set in Georgia, because I know nothing about Georgia, and it's a great way of, just getting to know a place. I loved Montalbano, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but the Sicilian detective, just brilliant. I couldn't get enough of that series. It was just so brilliant. And there's so many. I love, I live in central London by the river, and I love the novels of Jane Casey. I don't know if, I think she's Irish, but she writes about London like a, Londoner, and the crimes are kind of around here and around the river and so on. And I live here, and I've lived here for 30 odd years, and I still see something new in my city. So I think that's pretty good going. And with Ian Rankin, I think he's got a new book out soon. The fact that he can just he can still make me feel like I really want to go there after so many books. With this now aging, creaky detective, Rebus, he's still on it. I think that's amazing. I think that's wow. If it's something you can only dream of, achieving.
And I think it's a testament to quality writing, though, when you bring the location to life. It's as part the city sometimes feels as important as the other things that are going on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it could only happen there, or it could only be a certain thing. And I think it's I'm not wording this well, but there's a magic to bringing it alive.
I think that's because, I remember when in lockdown, I remember walking down by Tate Modern, and if you've been to London recently, down there's just hordes of tourists every day, and on the bridge going over to St. Paul's. And I went down there, and it was just me and my son, and some man walking his dog 500 meters away. And I just realized that it just wasn't London anymore. And I like the interaction between a city and the people who live in it. And it's a city, Copenhagen couldn't, it doesn't, it has it makes a mark on the people who live there. There's something in the air, there's something in the sort of, yeah, in the sort of feel of Copenhagen that leaves a mark on you, and it probably makes people act in a certain way. It's quite a calm city. Everyone cycles, people leave early, go home and eat with their families. It's not a hectic sort of big, hype skyscraper city. It's not like that at all. And I think that has a bearing on how people interact with each other. It is actually cozy. You go there and, there's kind of, you've got all the kind of little sort of rugs lying out on the cafe tables, and big pram with a baby outside the. This is a thing in Copenhagen with the big prams. So that's not the same as being in Glasgow. Glasgow will leave another imprint on you, and I like that interplay between the city and the people who live in it, particularly people who are not natives, or who are able to look at the city in a little bit of a kind of at an angle.
Yeah, which is what you bring to life in your book. Laura says it's an extra character in the story.
Yeah, that I do think of that, actually. I do think of that. And it's not I like making it a little bit surprising, because I think if you think of having a weekend away in Copenhagen, it's going to be absolutely lovely. I can promise you. Leave it till it gets a bit warmer. But you go there, and I just you're going to have a fantastic time. You're going to go there, and you're going to think, this doesn't feel like a place of crime, and this doesn't feel. But I like so I think there's a contrast there between this beautiful city, the wonderful Copenhagen, and then when you sit in that beautiful cafe, just imagine that just around the corner in that little building there might be something happening that isn't very nice. And that contrast between the beautiful and what lies beneath also really interests me. Not all this as it seems.
Yeah, but that's true everywhere, isn't it? And I think what you bring to the book, and maybe some of it's from your experience of like writing it now from being away, is that view of kind of exploring it from the outsider's eyes. I wonder if that's what brings it to life.
Yeah, because it's like if you live there every day, and it's where you go to school and you go to the co-op to buy your food, and maybe it just feels a little bit more kind of, I don't know, pedestrian. But when you're not living there, you can let your imagination kind of roam, and you can also create, as I say, something that isn't quite real. Maybe something supernatural, or you can at least play with people thinking it's supernatural. So you can do that when you're not bound by place. I don't know it very well anymore, so I'm there and I look at the money and I'm unsure, how do I do with my Metro card? But the core of it I know really, really well, because I spent so long there. So yeah, all the rest is just kind of surface stuff, like how to use your Metro card, or how much is a pint of milk. Those things you can learn, but those are sort of underlying the feel of the place, the history, the people who live there. It was interesting though, because the first book I ran it past another author colleague in Copenhagen, and said to just read this, and she said, for instance, I'd written somewhere that somebody was taking looking at lots of flats for rent in London and Copenhagen, and she said, do you realize you can't get a flat to rent in Copenhagen for love nor money? It's really, really hard. So you can't just make it something that you just go in and you choose a flat and you go and live there. It doesn't work like that. So that's interesting. That's local knowledge that you can put in the book.
What is the reception like? Because they are all published in Danish, aren't they? And you go out and do the crime festival in Copenhagen that looks amazing, by the way. I really want to go to that one day.
the big fair, the book fair
Yeah.
in Copenhagen. Yeah.
Would you what's the response like to people who are reading it over there?
Do you know what? I never for a minute imagined that even somebody would publish it. I in Denmark, it's kind of written for an international audience to tell them about where I'm from, and because it's got something other. But in Denmark, it's people who live in Copenhagen. I was on a panel about which was about having Copenhagen in the heart, and I thought I'm such a fraud. I haven't lived there for many years, and I was on there with real Copenhagen crime writers, sitting there. I can't believe it, but it's done really well there. I don't know what it is what they sort of connect with. Maybe because you know 4/5 of the Danish population don't live in Copenhagen, so for them it's also an experience. I don't know. Um, but it's done really well, and it's been translated by a Danish translator whom I've met, who's amazing. And because I am Danish, I can read her work, and normally you can't, if it's translated. So it's a rather weird and wonderful experience. I never saw it coming. I thought they would feel like I was bringing them something they know already. But they've been popular, and back home, which is a surprise to me. Maybe even more so than here. Actually, maybe here the UK book market is difficult to break into. Before we started this live, I was saying that for instance, getting a seat at the Harrogate Festival is hard. You've got to. But now I've been. I think I understand why, because it's a really small program actually, and it's got really established writers on it. But in Denmark, maybe it's a smaller pond or something. I don't know. But in the UK, I think these books are still to kind of find a larger audience, which is something that just takes time. And I guess for an author, the main thing is just to keep writing books and that you enjoy, and not think too much about that, and just kind of keep it up, keep doing it. I think also when you're writing a series, the more books you have. I don't know about you, but I'm a binge reader. So if I discover a series that I really like, but if I discover an author I love, I'll just go right through all the books. And I think it's easier as a proposition, as a crime writer. It's easier, the more books you have in your series, rather than kind of wait a couple of years, there's another one, and blah blah. So it kind of builds up. So yeah, I think.
I will do that. The reason I am poor is because I find so many authors I like, and then I will buy everything they've written. Because I'm like, if I like them, they're gonna just everything they write is gonna be something I like.
Yes.
Right? Like I don't even need to know. Like if a new book comes out by you, I'm gonna like because I've read the other books I like, and it's like
Oh,
a win-win. But then I don't always read them in like quick succession. So I might have like a few by a favorite author on the. I'm looking at my book pile now, and I can see some by favorite authors that are like waiting to be read.
so I've got Kate Atkinson. I think I've always loved Kate Atkinson's writing, and as a crime writer, she's very quirky. But I just love her books. But I'm behind on her. I haven't read the latest outing, and I tried never to miss a book by her. The same with Rose Tremaine, whom I've lost sort of, because like you, I've got them here to read, but there's not enough time, and I listen to audiobooks as well. I read a lot for friends who are bringing out new books as well. But yeah, I do love it, but there's not enough hours in the day, is there, for all
No,
the
never
books
is.
that are brought out? Yeah.
Well, we're on that topic. What have you read recently and really enjoyed?
I'm reading a lot of non-fiction forensics at the moment. There's a book by Val McDermid that I never knew about, but she's written a book with called Forensics. Val McDermid has written a book about forensics. It's a few years old now, 2014, and she goes through a number of cases, and we'll kind of talk about the different kind of forensics techniques that were involved. And I've learned stuff about flies that I wish I could unlearn. I've learned stuff about, matches, for instance, that if, arsonists will strike a match and they'll throw it and they'll think the match just goes away, it burns up in the fire, but actually it doesn't. And each match has an imprint from where it was made, and it can help somebody understand how the fire was started. Never knew any of that stuff. So, and I've read a book by a forensic pathologist who's very well known in Denmark, who's talked about. I think the book is called 117 Ways to Die, but it's basically written about his experiences, and I find that really interesting. I've read Strange Sally Diamond is probably one of the kind of later fiction books, which I really enjoyed. I really love Liz Nugent. I think she's very good. And at the moment, I'm starting, and I'm afraid of starting, but I'm starting on J.D. Kirk, whom I've never really read anything by before. I think he's written 340 books. So God help me if I like his series. I may be sometime.
He has written quite a lot of books. I think there's a spin-off series as well, though. I don't think they're all in one series.
No, that's right. That's right. And
you're safe.
I think this one is called A Litter of Bones. So that was his first in his main kind of detective series. There's also Anne Cleeve's. I read The Heron's Cry, and then I read Stieg Abel's Death Under a Big Sky. Have I got the name right? And he's just got a new book out. I quite enjoyed that. I thought that was quite well written. So yeah, I have a very good friend who buys even more books than me, and every now and again I get a little goodie bag from her with all the books she's read that she's passing on to me. So yeah, I'm very, very lucky.
It's where you need, this is why things like this place and stuff are good, isn't it? Because you need, like, if you're a big reader, you need friends like that where you can swap books.
Yeah. And it makes you feel better. You think, I'm buying this book, but when I've finished, I'll pass it on to my sister, my friend, so it's okay. I can invest in this. I'm an absolute sucker for book fairs, and, I will buy books by fellow panelists, one recent discovery was Ambrose Parry, Chris Brookmeyer and Marisa Hetzman. They write as Ambrose Parry and about this. She's an anaesthetist, Marisa Hetzman, and they write about, when, the discovery of chloroform and that kind of. I can really recommend those. They're really great. And I discovered them by going to Bloody Scotland or one of the Scottish festivals, and they were there and they were selling those books. I thought, oh, brilliant. There's so many that I need to. I've never read any Val McDermid's Karen Peary series. I don't know if other people are familiar with them. I've just never read them, so I've bought a couple of those as well to start. It's an absolute disgrace. My partner can't, he just can't believe how many. He goes through one book and I'll have 20, sort of that ratio.
Mine's resigned himself to the fact that there's going to be a lot of books in the house forever. Although he does say we've got a favourite anime where someone dies under a pile of books, and he does say that is going to be the way we go. Like, one day I'll just find you and all of the books will have collapsed.
Yeah, I really sympathize. They're now in my hallway also, because I keep the new bookshelves to keep sort of turning up all over the place. But I also hate throwing them out. It feels deeply wrong to throw away books. So yeah, but so much pleasure from them, and from reading. And I think one of the most wonderful things about being a crime writer is the community. You probably know this, but crime writers are really some of them are really, really funny, or just a really fun bunch to be around. I don't know if people have read Abir Mukherjee. What was it called? A Rising Man, I think, was his first one. Sort of takes place in India. He's absolutely hysterically funny. He's like a stand-up comedian when you go and sort of meet him, and incredibly generously gave me a quote for my book. He's people are like that in the community. They will help. They'll help other writers. It's a really warm place to be, and it's really amazing to have that in two countries, because because I'm Danish, I kind of get to have it at home as well. So really, really lovely colleagues who are just really fun to be with. In contrast to what we write about, we can, be quite nice to each other.
So give us a hint about what is, without any spoilers, because there are questions at the end of book 3 that we need answers to. We won't say what they are, but there are things that need answering. What is there? Can you give us any clues about book 4? Or
yeah, I'll give you a little bit. I sort of the first book was in the winter, in the snow. The second book was in the spring. This book is in the heat wave, and we're back to it's a few months later, and it's just before Christmas in Denmark, and there's a new investigation. So when you read this third book, if you read it, there's a bit of a cliffhanger. I quite like a cliffhanger, which then takes you into the beginning of the next book. So it's been a few months, and at the end of this book, it's August, and we rejoin the characters a few months later. And again, and I can also say that there's a sort of there's a cold case involved in the next one. Which hopefully I'll finish in July this year if I pull my socks up. So, and there's also a bit of sort of, so there's more the private lives, you hear a little bit more about, but I never want to get the private lives to sort of get in the way of the investigation, because I also think it can spoil the pace a little bit if you stop too long and look at backstory and so on. So I try not to do it too much.
I think you have the balance right. And I think we should add that although you leave a cliffhanger that needs answering, like I need answers. Now. But you do wrap up the main case. Like,
I do, because
some people won't read if they don't feel like the main case is, but it is wrapped up. It's just more to do with the series, I think. Like,
I don't know,
but it's not a.
No, that's very true, because I really hate when cases aren't solved and I don't get that satisfaction. And I think it's part of the sort of compact with the readers, come on, don't leave us. I was watching True Detective recently with Jodie Foster, the latest installment, which I just absolutely adored, because again, a little bit of supernatural in Alaska, what's not to like. And as the series wore on, I just thought, oh God, we're not going to get the answers. And then actually we did get the answers, and it was hugely satisfying. I thought it was great. And everything was tied up, and I really like that. But I do think there's got to be something that propels. I won't say what happens, but I did give myself a little bit of a challenge. And I quite like that as well, because there's a little bit of a sort of, come on, what are you going to do now? Where are you going to take it now? And so it's also to sort of keep myself going. In the same vein, I will quite often completely change the ending towards the end of the book, because I hardly ever go for the one I was going to go for, because it starts to feel predictable, and then you have to sort of change it. But it's probably the hardest bit, because from reviewers you always get, oh, I knew from the beginning who it was. And maybe we do, and when you've read a lot of crime novels like I have, you can sort of see it a little bit and can see the little red herrings and stuff. But I don't mind that. I still enjoy it.
I know work it out.
It doesn't spoil it for me if I kind of know, but I try to confuse people. You sort of have to do that, don't you? It's part of the deal. So
you always confuse me. You've got. It's not hard. I don't think I often solve crime books, to be fair, and I've read a lot. You've got about a minute left. Remind everyone what they're going away to buy and pre-order.
Sorry.
You've got a minute left. Remind people what they're going to go away and buy.
Oh, so this is Back from the Dead, which is available in paperback. We've gone straight to paperback this time because feedback shows us that that's what people want. And it's also available as an audiobook and as an ebook. So it's, I think, $10.99, but there's actually some good deals out there at the moment. And it's also on BookBub. If people are, I don't know if people use BookBub, but it's there as well as offered. And please tell me what you think. I mean, I have a website you can find, just it's my name. You can find me online. And I have a newsletter if you want to kind of, I try to interview other kind of Scandinois authors in the newsletter. And I also talk about what it's like to write and try to encourage, others, and talk about some of my own pitfalls and things like that. But I'd be really happy if you'd, read the books and tell me what you think. There's a lot to think, there's a lot to have opinions about in them. So be great to hear from people.
Excellent. And then all I have to say is thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's almost tradition.
It is now, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you. I couldn't see who was on the call, and I can't see the chat, but it was nice to meet you all anyway.
I think that's just a technical glitch, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I'll hopefully see you around, Caroline.